Story 1. When I first landed in Seattle, Washington, I was 20 years old, fresh from a tiny town in France, and buzzing with a mix of excitement and nerves. I'd never been this far from home, let alone across an ocean, and my English was shaky at best. But I was eager, ready for an adventure as an au pair, imagining a year of cultural exchange, new experiences, and stories to share when I got back. The agency matched me with the Thompson family in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood. Think tidy lawns, big houses, wide backyards. The kind of place where nothing bad ever seems to happen. Driving up to their home, I felt a wave of relief. This would be easy, I thought. Safe. The Thompsons had 2 boys. Ethan, 12, and Caleb, 9. Ethan was your typical preteen. Lazy, a bit rude, glued to his Xbox, but harmless. He'd crack jokes, roll his eyes, and mostly keep to himself. Caleb, though, was different. The moment I met him, something felt off. He didn't smile or fidget like most kids. He just stared, his eyes locked on me. Not shy or curious, but cold, like he was sizing me up. After a long, uncomfortable pause, he tilted his head and asked, "Are you the maid?" I laughed it off, a nervous chuckle, and said I was here to look after him and his brother. He didn't laugh back. He just kept watching, his lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. I brushed it aside, figuring he was just a quirky kid. The Thompsons warned me Caleb could be difficult, but they downplayed it, saying he had a bit of an attitude. I nodded, thinking I could handle a bratty 9-year-old. I'd dealt with kids before. How hard could it be? But in those first few days, I started to feel uneasy. Caleb's stare followed me everywhere. I'd catch him lingering in doorways, his small figure half hidden, watching me fold laundry or cook dinner. He wouldn't say anything, just stand there, unblinking. It wasn't playful or innocent. It felt deliberate, like he was studying me. One day, while I was unpacking in my room, I glanced up and saw him peeking through a crack in the door. My stomach twisted, but I told myself he was just curious. Kids are nosy, right? Still, I started closing doors a little faster. Then the lies began. Caleb told his teacher that Ethan tried to push him down the stairs, which Ethan swore never happened. He told a neighbor his parents forgot to feed him dinner, which I knew wasn't true. Each time, he'd deliver these stories with a blank face, no hint of guilt. When I tried to correct him, he'd narrow his eyes and mutter, "Don't tell me what to do." It wasn't just defiance. It felt personal, like he was testing me, waiting for me to slip up. I was alone in this big, perfect house, far from home, with no one to talk to. The Thompsons were busy, always out or distracted, and I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle the job. I kept quiet, but the weight of Caleb's gaze grew heavier every day. It was like he was always there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. I started to feel trapped, like I was the one being studied, not him. Things with Caleb got worse, fast. I was already on edge, feeling his eyes on me constantly. But one night, about 2 months into my stay with the Thompsons in Seattle, I pulled back my bedsheets and froze. Dozens of thumbtacks were scattered across my mattress, their sharp points glinting up at me, waiting for me to lie down. My heart pounded as I stared, noticing tiny punctures in the mattress cover. I remembered catching Caleb spying on me that morning, his face pressed to the crack in my door while I was tidying my room. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now I wasn't so sure. Fear gripped me, but I didn't tell his parents. I was terrified they'd think I was overreacting and send me back to France. So I swept the tacks away and tried to pretend it didn't happen. But Caleb's behavior only grew stranger. He started trailing me around the house, his footsteps soft but deliberate. I'd turn a corner and find him there, staring from a doorway or sitting silently across the room while I read. His gaze was unrelenting, like he was waiting for something. One afternoon, while watering the garden, I caught a whiff of something foul, like rotting meat. I followed the smell to a corner of the yard where the soil looked freshly turned. Curious, I grabbed a small shovel and dug, only to stumble back in horror. 3 dead rabbits lay there, their bodies twisted, one with its legs bound by a string. My stomach churned. I ran to tell Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, but when they questioned Caleb, he gave them an innocent shrug and said it wasn't him. They believed him, blaming neighborhood kids. I started locking my bedroom door at night. Then came the worst moment. I woke up one night to a faint creak in my room. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and there was Caleb, standing by my bed, holding a kitchen knife. I screamed, my voice shattering the silence. By the time his parents rushed in, the knife was gone, shoved under the bed. Caleb claimed he was sleepwalking. I pointed to the knife handle sticking out, begging them to believe me, but they dismissed it. Mrs. Thompson even looked annoyed, like I was causing trouble. Caleb just smiled, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. I felt so alone, trapped in that house with no one to turn to. The next morning, it all fell apart. Mrs. Thompson called me to the living room, holding a pearl necklace I'd never seen. She said she found it in my bag and accused me of stealing. I pleaded, tears in my eyes, but Caleb stood in the hallway, smirking. I knew he'd planted it. They fired me on the spot. I flew back to France the next day, my dreams of adventure crushed. For months, I was depressed, convinced I'd ruined my chance at a life in the US. The isolation, the feeling of being watched, the helplessness.it haunted me. Years later, I made it back to America, found a good job, and built a life. But I still think about Caleb, that cold stare, that smile. I wonder what kind of person he's become, and a part of me hopes I never find out. Story 2. I was 22 when I left my tiny village in Germany to become an au pair in Austin, Texas. I'd always been independent, outgoing, and dreamed of being a child psychologist. So working with kids in America felt like the perfect adventure. Austin was vibrant, with its sprawling, wealthy suburbs and big, modern houses. The neighborhood I landed in was all manicured lawns and fancy SUVs, the kind of place that screamed safety and privilege. I was thrilled, even if my English wasn't perfect. My dad, who's from the UK, made sure I could get by. The agency connected me with a great host family, and I quickly clicked with other au pairs nearby. My best friend was Megan, a loud, tall American girl who loved exploring as much as I did. We'd hit the bars near the university most weekends, soaking up the lively scene. The guys there loved our accents, and being international gave us a bit of an edge. Life felt like a dream. One night at our favorite spot, a bar called The Hideout, I was grabbing drinks when a tall guy with curly brown hair walked up. "You're German, right?" he said, catching me off guard. Most people guess European, not German, so I was intrigued. His name was Lucas, and he had this easy confidence that drew me in. We talked for hours, and it felt natural, not like the usual cheesy pickup lines I got. Lucas knew random facts about German culture, like festivals and food, that made me feel seen. He wasn't just hitting on me. He seemed genuinely curious about who I was. I introduced him to Megan, and his friend Ryan joined us. It was one of those perfect nights. Lucas asked for my number before I left, and I gave it to him without a second thought. A few days later, he invited me over for dinner. I expected takeout or a restaurant plan, but when I got to his apartment, he was cooking. A pasta dish, no less. It was sweet, and I ended up helping him in the kitchen, laughing over a bottle of wine. I stayed the night feeling comfortable, like I'd known him forever. The next morning, I noticed his room was different from most college guys' places. It was clean, no posters, just walls covered in black and white landscape photos. They looked familiar, but I couldn't place why. When I got up to look closer, I saw they were all labeled cities, castles, countryside, all from Germany. One photo stopped me cold, an aerial shot of my village, a place so small most Germans wouldn't know it. I laughed, half joking, and asked if he was obsessed with German architecture. He smiled, said his dad collected aerial photos, and he'd picked his favorites. It was a wild coincidence, but I bought it. Still, something about it nagged at me. Lucas kept popping up in my life after that. weekend dates, Tuesday bar nights with Megan. He was thoughtful, always checking if I was having fun. But little things started to feel off. He knew I was a vegetarian, though I'd never told him. Once, he mentioned a cafe I loved back home, one I'd only posted about years ago on Instagram. I brushed it off, but I started feeling watched, like someone was piecing together my life behind my back. The unease I felt about Lucas grew heavier, like a shadow I couldn't shake. We kept seeing each other in Austin, and he was still charming, but the little things piled up. One night, he took me to an Italian restaurant, saying he chose it for its vegetarian options. I hadn't told him I was a vegetarian, so I teased, asking how he knew. He said he saw it on my Instagram, which eased my mind until I got home and realized that post was years old, buried under hundreds of others. You'd have to dig deep to find it, and that thought made my skin crawl. I started noticing how Lucas seemed to know too much. Places I'd been, things I liked, details I'd never shared. One drunken night, he rambled about wanting a German wife, saying au pairs were great with kids. It sounded like a weird fantasy, but it left me uneasy, like I was part of some plan. I pushed it down, not wanting to ruin what we had, but the doubt wouldn't leave. Then, one night while he slept, I grabbed his phone. He'd never hidden his password, and curiosity got the better of me. What I found made my stomach drop. There was a folder labeled Wife, filled with screenshots of my social media. Posts, captions, tagged locations, even old stories I'd forgotten about. His notes app was worse. Translations of my German posts, a schedule of my outings based on my Instagram stories, and details about my village, my hobbies, everything. The worst was a photo of my driver's license, lost months ago at a frat party. It hit me like a punch. Lucas had found my ID, tracked down my Instagram, and planned every moment of our chance meeting. There was even a message, too vile to repeat, detailing what he wanted from me. I felt sick, betrayed, like the person I'd trusted was a stranger. My hand shook as I slipped out of his apartment, not even stopping to grab my shoes. I didn't take photos for proof. Fear took over, and I just needed to get out. Driving back to my host family's house, I felt exposed, like he could find me anywhere. Germans value privacy, and mine had been ripped away. The next morning, my phone blew up with text from Lucas asking where I'd gone, if I'd looked at his phone. I sent one message, warning that I'd call the police if he contacted me again, then blocked him on everything. I locked down my Instagram, made a private story for close friends, and prayed he didn't know my host family's address. For days, I lived in fear, jumping at every noise, checking over my shoulder. Then, a few weeks later, I noticed a silver car cruising by the house, sometimes parked across the street. Fake Instagram accounts and unknown numbers started messaging me, always asking to talk. I knew it was him. I felt trapped, isolated in a country far from home, unsure if the police would even take me seriously. I'm building a case now, but my au pair contract ends soon, and I'll be back in Germany. I hope I never see Lucas again, but the pit in my stomach tells me he's still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. Story 3. Ever since I was a kid growing up in Canada, I dreamed of living in Europe and working with children. I've always had a knack for connecting with kids, and I knew my life wouldn't feel complete without a job that involved caring for them. So when I found out I could become an au pair in France, using the French I'd learned in high school, it felt like the stars had aligned. I was 23, and the idea of being part of a French family, improving my French, and exploring Europe was thrilling. The move wasn't easy. Money was tight, and I didn't have family support, so I couldn't afford a fancy agency. Instead, I used a free au pair website, which wasn't ideal but was all I could manage. That's how I connected with Sophie. She seemed warm and genuine during our video calls, calling me chérie in a way that felt motherly and charming. She needed help with her 2 kids while her husband traveled for work, and she asked a lot about my experience with children and how I felt about family life. I trusted her, even though she didn't share much about herself. The only thing that felt off was the kids. I asked to meet them on our calls, but Sophie always had an excuse. One was napping, the other was at a playdate or school. She promised I'd meet them as soon as I arrived, so I let it slide, figuring I'd see them soon enough. She sent me a formal agreement. Everything looked legit, and we set a start date. I packed my life into a suitcase, said goodbye to Canada, and flew to Paris. Landing at Charles de Gaulle, I was buzzing with nerves and excitement, ready to start this new chapter. But Sophie wasn't there to pick me up, which surprised me. Every au pair I talked to said their host family met them at the airport. My phone buzzed with a message from her, written in French, saying she was stuck in traffic and someone else would get me. I used Google Translate to double check, and it confirmed she was sending someone to the drop-off area. It felt strange, and a small knot formed in my stomach. A few minutes later, a car pulled up, and a woman in her late 40s with short blonde hair and a bright smile approached. She introduced herself as Sophie's cousin and said, "You must be Sophie's au pair." He hesitated. Something about her felt too polished, too eager. She didn't look anything like Sophie, and when I asked to call Sophie to confirm, she said Sophie was probably still driving and assured me everything was fine. I tried calling anyway, but it went straight to voicemail, no ring. My jet-lagged brain was screaming that something was wrong, but I was exhausted, alone in a foreign country, and didn't know what else to do. Against my better judgment, I got in the car. As we drove, she kept up a stream of chatter about my flight, my life in Canada, and if I was excited for my new job. But when I asked about Sophie or the kids, she brushed it off, saying I'd love them and see them soon. Her answers were vague, and her smile never wavered, which made me feel like I was being watched, sized up, and led somewhere I didn't belong. The car ride with Sophie's so-called cousin felt wrong from the start, and it only got worse. She kept talking, her voice overly cheerful, but her answers about Sophie and the kids were empty, like she was dodging me. I glanced out the window, expecting to see Paris's suburbs, but the scenery shifted to something industrial. Warehouses, empty lots, no houses in sight. My heart started racing. I pulled up the address Sophie had given me on Google Maps, and we were nowhere near it. Panic set in. I asked the woman where we were going, trying to sound calm. She smiled, called it a shortcut, and said Sophie was waiting, but her eyes didn't match her words, and I knew she was lying. I felt trapped, alone in a strange country with no one to call. I told her to take me back to the airport. She ignored me, repeating that I was overreacting. My voice got louder, and I said I'd call the police if she didn't turn around. She just left, telling me to relax. The car slowed at a light, and I didn't think. I grabbed the door handle, kicked it open, and jumped out onto the street. My suitcase was still in the trunk, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The woman didn't speed off like I expected. She sat there, staring at me through the windshield, her smile gone, like I was the one acting crazy. I pulled out my phone and called my mom, my hands shaking. As I explained, I saw the woman on her phone speaking quickly in a language I didn't recognize. Not French, not English. It felt like she was talking to Sophie, and the thought made my stomach churn. I told my mom I was going to call the police, and when I shouted it loud enough for the woman to hear, she finally reacted. She stepped out, tossed my suitcase onto the road, and drove off without a word. I scribbled down the license plate, tears stinging my eyes, as my mom urged me to find somewhere safe. There were no cars around, no people, just me on an empty street in the middle of nowhere. I felt so small, so helpless, like I'd walked into a trap. Eventually, I hitchhiked to a friend's place in Paris, my only lifeline in France. Her family took me in, helped me report everything to the police, and even paid for my flight back to Canada. The police later told us there was no au pair family registered under Sophie's name. The number she used was prepaid, untraceable, and the photos of her kids were stolen from the internet. Everyone I spoke to said the same thing. I'd narrowly escaped being trafficked. The realization hit hard. I'd spent all my savings on that flight, only to be betrayed, left with nothing but fear. Back in Canada, I was a wreck, haunted by how close I'd come to something unimaginable. It took time, but I refused to let it define me. I saved up, found a verified agency, and returned to France. I'm working toward residency now, rebuilding my dream, but I still feel that lingering dread, like someone's watching, waiting for me to let my guard down again. I was lucky, but the isolation, the powerlessness.it stays with you, a quiet shadow you can't outrun.